Raiders, Chiefs, a rivalry that's been, well, pretty lopsided as of late. But it's Chiefs week, and we're here to talk about it on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate that. Whether you're checking us out on YouTube or you're just checking us out wherever you get your podcasts, we appreciate that. The show continues to grow each and every day. That's because of your support, Raider Nation. Of course, the job my man Ari does. Without him, there is no Locked On Raider podcast on YouTube, and so we definitely appreciate him each and every day. Check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And normally, we've got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line wide open like some old school TV antennas at 707-654-4693. We'll get back to your calls and texts in segment number 3 to close out the show on Friday's edition. None today. Today, it is the crossover edition. For anyone who's just tuning in for the very first time, first of all, we appreciate you and thank you for your time. On Thursdays, throughout the course of the regular season, whatever team is up next on the schedule for the Silver and Black, that other host for that podcast will join the show and we'll break it down. So this week, week 8, it is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs come in 6-0. Raiders obviously 2-5. So Chris Clark, host of Locked On Chiefs, he'll join the show. We'll talk about the biggest storylines from the Chiefs, biggest storyline for the Raiders, and we'll also talk about keys to victory, what has to win or what has to happen to win, what has to not happen to have a chance to win as well. So again, two teams in the AFC West. It's a bitter rival, but as of late, the Chiefs have gotten the best of the Raiders, except for that Christmas game, the last time they played, which was actually the last time that the Chiefs lost. So that's coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, segment 1 through 3. We got you crossover edition style. Matter of fact, we'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all lowercase to win $50 instantly when you play $5. It's just that easy. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase on the Prize Picks app. You got to do that right now, and I'll tell you more about them later on. But let's go ahead and jump into part 1 of the crossover edition. Chris Clark and myself, we start out talking all things Kansas City Chiefs and really highlighting the biggest news in the NFL on Wednesday, which was the trade from the Tennessee Titans to the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. He went to bed on Tuesday night knowing that Mason Rudolph was his quarterback, and when he woke up on Wednesday morning, Patrick Mahomes was his quarterback. So we talk all things D-Hop to the Chiefs, what that can mean for this Sunday and moving forward throughout the course of the season and even into the playoffs. We do that right now on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here's part 1.
Q, there's so much to talk about when you look at this rivalry, its past and where it is right now. Raiders are a little bit different than I thought they would be this season, but still lots to talk about in this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And the Raiders are a lot different than I thought they were going to be this year, as they're sitting there at 2-5 and they're riding a 3-game losing streak. And head coach Antonio Pierce, I know he's in his first year as the full-time head coach. He didn't expect to be at this position either, and especially having a lot of penalties and a lot of turnovers. That's something that he emphasized during training camp that just couldn't happen, right? This team's not good enough to be able to overcome that. And it's been rearing its ugly head the last 3 weeks. And a main reason why they're on that 3-game losing streak. And they're not as talented as some teams in the league, but they're not as bad as they've looked because of all the turnovers and penalties that they've had. So this is going to be a good one, man. I mean, Allegiant Stadium, the Raiders have never beat the Chiefs in Allegiant Stadium, right? That's a fact. And then the last time the Chiefs lost was to the Raiders, but they're in Arrowhead on Christmas, and all the Chiefs did is go on to win the Super Bowl following that. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot to talk about in this one.
And they won it at Allegiant Stadium. Kansas City's never lost in Allegiant Stadium, and they won the Super Bowl in Allegiant Stadium, not to add salt to your wounds. But the thing that really sticks out to me here is, the Chiefs' big story of the day. Biggest story, and I think it's probably the NFL's biggest story. Kansas City made a trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Got him for a 5th-round pick. They're bringing in a guy that has been a fantastic wide receiver in his career, and he is going to step in and be basically wide receiver 1, probably by default on Sunday. I don't know that he'll get, the snaps that you would expect him to get in a couple of weeks, but this is a situation where I think he's going to play Sunday. What do you see from this trade?
Well, yeah, DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs is actually something I expected to happen last year. Remember, there was all the rumblings of, D-Hop needs to go to the Chiefs. He needs to go there. I mean, think about this. My guy, went to bed and Mason Rudolph was his quarterback. He woke up and Patrick Mahomes was his quarterback. So you want to talk about an upgrade. That's huge. I'm a big DeAndre Hopkins guy. I liked him a lot when he was in Houston, went on to Arizona when Billy O decided to trade him for basically a cup of coffee. He worked out in Arizona for a while and then ended up in Tennessee. And it was just like, what is he doing there in Tennessee? So now he gets to have an opportunity to kind of put some extra juice and some life back into his NFL career. Get him with Patrick Mahomes, who clearly is not playing at the level that we're used to seeing. The Chiefs' offense isn't clicking like we're used to seeing, but they're still 6-0 and they're winning games. And so now they have a bona fide number one wide receiver in D-Hop. And he's not the athlete. He's not as fast as he was back in the day. But you know what he has? He has hands. And you're not going to lose those hands. And he's got some big old mitts, matter of fact. And, he's going to be a really good addition. I'm not sure how much we'll get to see him on Sunday against the Raiders. I'm hoping not that much, to be honest. But, but he's a hell of an addition, no doubt about it, for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Well, and you talk about that, and the big thing for me, and one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this move is because they made it this week, and they didn't wait 2 more weeks. If they waited 2 more weeks, and you get into like where you're getting ready for Week 10, then you look at Week 11 where they play the Buffalo Bills, and D-Hop probably isn't a guy that's going to get much playing time and really help you against the Bills. Now he's got basically 3 games to get ready for that specific game. Not trying to overlook the Raiders, just saying, looking at the Chiefs' schedule, that's the big one on the schedule that's coming up. So to me, I think that this is a fantastic move. I think the timing was great. Makes a lot of sense for both sides. And you're absolutely right about the hands. That is one thing that Kansas City hasn't had in a very long time, is somebody can go up and get the jump ball, and somebody that they can trust to go get that type of throw. And one of the things I think he's going to step in and do for this Chiefs team is really help in the red zone and help in those tight, compact spaces where it's going to be have to put the ball on his body, or even if you're putting it a little bit away, he's got the hands that are going to bring that type of play in. I mean, look at what happened a couple weeks ago against New Orleans with Juju. You throw the ball right at his face and it pops up and it goes for an interception the other direction in a situation that wasn't Patrick's fault. But what are you going to do? Now you have a guy that you can trust to make that play.
Yeah, there's no doubt, man. And D-Hop has had those hands. He's been able to go get those 50-50 balls his whole career. I mean, it's just the reality of it. That's who he's been. And Kyler Murray was the recipient of it for a long time. Deshaun Watson was a recipient of it a long time. And then, of course, what he had in Tennessee. But now he's got, a guy in Patrick Mahomes that can give him an opportunity to go make a play. And he's not going to worry about it. He's going to probably put the ball right where it needs to be and expect that D-Hop comes down with it. And the one thing I'll say, and, I noticed this, and I don't have to tell you, but the Chiefs go out and make a move for Kadarius Toney. He makes big plays in the Super Bowl. They win. And then they go out and they make who did they make a move for? Mecole Hardman. And then all of a sudden he makes big plays in the Super Bowl. So now if you're D-Hop, all of a sudden they go out and make a move for you. You're feeling pretty good. Like, hey, I'm next in line to make some big plays in the Super Bowl. Good. I got it. No problem. So again, I just think it was a heck of a move by Kansas City to bring in that weapon for Patrick Mahomes and company.
Well, and you look at it too, and you talk about, a guy like Kadarius Toney who wasn't looked at to be a big thing for that season, yet he goes out and makes one of the biggest plays with the punt return and then catches a touchdown pass in the same game. And you're right, Mecole Hardman comes back and he has the winning touchdown. And now you're sitting in a situation where you bring in Hopkins and he's basically set up to have that type of same role and perhaps an even bigger role. One of the other things that we found out on Wednesday was that Hollywood Brown is actually coming back from he's not coming back, but he's getting closer to coming back. He is ahead of schedule in his recovery. Don't know that means he's going to play, maybe before the playoffs, but it does sound like they could get him back for the playoffs. That would be a huge addition to have both D-Hop and Hollywood for this team going into the playoffs this season.
And the good thing about it is if you're Kansas City, right, you're 6-0. I know it hasn't looked great. The defense has been fantastic, led by Steve Spagnuolo. It's going to be that. But, you can make plans. Kansas City can afford to say, okay, this guy's coming back maybe by the playoffs. This guy can get ramped up for Buffalo in a couple of weeks. You can do that when you're 6-0. When you're the Raiders and you're 2-5, you're week to week. Right? There is no looking to next week. There is no looking to the bye week. There is no looking to – you have to go – week by week, game by game. That's your only options. But again, when you're 6-0 and all right, not only are we leading the division, but we have a great opportunity to even be the number 1 seed in the AFC, right? I mean, it's just you can make those kind of plans and plant those seeds so you can help out your own team later on down the road. So every team doesn't have that luxury. Kansas City does. And like you mentioned, Hollywood Brown potentially coming back for the playoffs. That would be a huge addition as well, adding some more speed to the mix. But, I mean, when you have D-Hop, man, you've got a great chance no matter what. And, oh, by the way, Patrick Mahomes is pretty good.
Yeah, and Xavier Worthy is getting a little bit better each week. And I mean, you talk about speed, that's going to be fun. He just missed him this past week, and I think that's going to be something they're going to get dialed in by the time playoffs roll around.
So there is part 1 of the conversation right there. Really deep dove into DeAndre Hopkins. I think that's a great addition to the Chiefs, something that they had talked about doing last year, and it never happened. He stayed there in Tennessee. They bring in a guy with a really good set of hands. Don't know how much the Raiders will see him this Sunday. I don't expect that he's really going to be up to speed to be able to contribute a whole lot. But as we know, it'll be another weapon for Patrick Mahomes, who, oh, by the way, is 6-0 on the season, even though they haven't been playing very well. But coming up in the next segment, we'll get into the Raiders. We'll get into what the Raiders have been doing, shooting themselves in the foot, get into some of the playmakers that the Raiders have. We'll talk a lot more Raiders coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get into that, though, I do want to tell you about one of our great sponsors here on the Locked On Podcast Network, including pre-alcohol drink by Zbiotics. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. So here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next day. You'll feel your best tomorrow. So check this out. How does it work? Simple. 1, you drink pre-alcohol, right? For the best result, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, you got to drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. That always is going to help. And then step 3, enjoy your tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Right now, go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. I'm looking in the camera closely. Vegas Jess, I'm looking at you. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover edition, talking all things Chiefs, all things Raiders. Spent a lot of time in segment number 1 talking about DeAndre Hopkins and what he means, what that addition to the Kansas City Chiefs offense means. So now I'm going to jump into the Raiders and what the Raiders have going on, in particular, what they've been having going wrong as the Raiders are riding a 3-game losing streak. And, of course, that's penalties and turnovers, a big bugaboo for the Silver and Black, something that really kind of surprises me is happening under AP's watch. But here we go, Chris Clark and me talking about the matchup, talking about the penalties, the turnovers the Raiders have been struggling with. Let's jump into part 2 right now.
Raiders have been beating themselves 2-5. Obviously, they traded away Devontae Adams. That was a huge deal. Big signing a couple years ago, didn't seem to work out. But what are you seeing from this team, and what is it that what's going on with them right now?
Just getting in their own way. They really are. It's something that I've asked Antonio Pierce about. He's been a guy ever since he was named the interim coach that, penalties were not going to be tolerated and turnovers were not going to be tolerated. And so there was a time when I could say that the Raiders were the least penalized team in the league. And boy, is that a rare thing to say when you talk about the Raiders. But you can't say that anymore.
Absolutely.
Because they've been penalized, right? So much. And so even going back to last week, 10 penalties for 80 yards, they're not good enough to overcome that. They're just not. And so they're shooting themselves in the foot. So when we talk to AP on Monday, when we talk to AP on Wednesday, when we talk to him coming up on Friday, that's all he keeps talking about. Penalties and turnovers. If they're going to have any opportunity to win any game, not just this week against Kansas City, but any game this season, they've got to cut out those penalties and those turnovers. They're just killing them. And there's a reason why Gardner Minshew got the start of the season. He's a veteran. He's got a little wiggle. So if the offensive line breaks down a little bit, he can run around. The schedule, the way it was set up, didn't look good for the Raiders in the first quarter of the season. So he wanted to get off to a hot start. And all Minshew's done really is turn the ball over, right? I mean, if the Raiders have 16 turnovers so far on the season, and they've only taken the ball away 3 times. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you that that's not a good ratio. That's not a good
No,
number right there. 16 turnovers and only turned it over 3 times. That's not good. So that's the big problem that they're having. So anytime that they do anything that looks good, they just shoot themselves in the foot. You know, I mean, they actually ran 75 plays on offense last week against the Rams, but as I mentioned, 10 penalties for 80 yards. You're basically giving up a touchdown. That's almost a whole 100 yards in field position. Like, you just can't do that. Like I said, they're not good enough. They have to figure out how to cut out those penalties, especially the pre-snap penalties, the false starts, right? The jumping off sides if they're playing defense. Just 12 men on the field. They've had that a couple weeks ago multiple times. Like, that's unacceptable. You can't do that. It's like focus. I don't know what they're thinking when they're out there, but a lot of those pre-snap penalties are a lack of focus. So you're not going to beat anyone. You're sure not going to beat the defending back-to-back champs if you have penalties and turnovers. You just can't give them that many opportunities, that many cracks at it. And that's what the Raiders' biggest issue has been the last 3 weeks.
and I just have to say, I hope they continue for another week.
Of course you do.
To be fair about it, though, I mean, you look at the way the Chiefs have played, and you and I talked about this right before we came on. Mahomes hasn't played well. I fully admit that he has not played well. I will say, in his defense, he doesn't really have great receivers, and he like with Brown out, with Rice out, and now Juju out, his receiving core is decimated, and it's going to be hard to continue to pass. So D-Hop was a huge addition to this team, but still 8 interceptions in 6 games. That's
Right.
not the way he plays. And you talk about the turnover differential. Kansas City was right down there with the Raiders a couple weeks ago, and it's not much better now. I mean, yeah, they got 3 turnovers this past week, so they're a little bit better, but they've been turning the ball over so much. Carson Steele had a couple of fumbles, Mahomes having 8 picks. That has really caused them trouble. Yes, they've been winning, but they haven't been playing good football. So I completely understand why you're saying that that's a big issue. The thing that really sticks out to me, though, is when you look at how Kansas City and Vegas usually play each other, is it's usually a close game regardless of how either team is playing. So
Yeah.
to me, that makes me nervous because Kansas City has played bad enough to lose several games, and the Raiders have shown that they have the ability to win games if they can do certain things like not turn the ball over or not commit the penalties. And when you start talking about focus, I don't know that there's anything else that's going to get them more focused than playing one of their division rivals and a hated team.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And of course, Max Crosby's always fired up and excited about this matchup with Kansas City, and of course his rival Patrick Mahomes, who he has a ton of respect for. But also, when they get on the gridiron against each other, right, he wants to tear his head off, right, as many defensive players want to do in the National Football League. But look, the Raiders' defense has been good. I thought they were going to be better. They've been good. They've answered the call a lot of times when the Raiders defense needs to make a big play, when the offense turns the ball over. I mean, look, the Rams scored 20 points off of turnovers last week. They only scored 20 points, right? So, I mean, they've given up 40-something points in the last 3 weeks, and I want to say 36 of those points have come off of turnovers, right? So, I mean, the Raiders defense really has stepped up, but the offense hasn't complimented them. So, I mean, they're going to give them a chance. I have no doubt about it. It's going to be, a slugfest, a dogfight. It's going to be, old brawl in the middle of the field, whatever you want to call it, right? Go outside and old school slobber knocker, whatever cute phrase you want to put in there. I think it's going to be that. I just feel like with the Raiders, the way that they've been turning the ball over, shooting themselves in the foot, if that old ugly habit pops back up, they don't have a chance in this game. Now, if they play a clean game, then I think, okay, we're talking about, Christmas last year where it's really a close game down to the wire. They can go either way. But if they don't play a clean game, there's no way that they beat Kansas City. It just won't happen.
Well, but look at how Kansas City lost last time against the Raiders on Christmas. It was basically they turned the ball over. I mean, Mahomes gives a pick 6, and they just weren't able to do anything that day. And he has been bad at times this season. And obviously, I would say that some of the interceptions he's had have not necessarily been on him, but he still has them. That's a problem. You can't continue to turn the ball over. But I also look at this game, and I also look at the Raiders, and you're absolutely right. They're going to play harder because it is the Chiefs. Yep. Max Crosby is going to be playing harder because it's the Chiefs. But Kansas City needs to go into this game, and you have to wonder. I don't like to talk about stuff that happens in the offseason too much or in training camp too much, but you have to wonder how much Mahomes is thinking about what happened in your training camp this year.
Yeah.
because I'm pretty sure he's got this date scheduled, or he's got this date circled because he has a little bit extra to prove for this game.
Oh, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. And it's funny. I've been thinking about that moment in training camp, and I was there in Costa Mesa where a fan brought a puppet and handed it to a rookie in Trey Taylor, a seventh round pick on top of that, not really knowing what, and this is Trey, not really knowing what was going on, just started messing with the puppet, and obviously it was a puppet that was made to resemble Patrick Mahomes, and everyone calls him the Kermit, or the Kermit the Frog or whatever, because of his voice. And so all of a sudden that goes viral, and I know Patrick Mahomes said, well, we'll handle it when we have to handle it, or when that time comes. And so I'm sure there's a little extra motivation, and why wouldn't you, right? Even if it's not a big deal, and I don't think it was a big deal. I think it was a bad step that the fan took. I thought it was really silly on the fans' part to even put Trey Taylor in that position to begin with. Especially when the Raiders haven't done anything. Like, the Raiders haven't won anything that was so significant that the fans should be bringing anything that has to do with Kansas City and trying to, dog it or act, disrespectful to it at that stage of the game, because look, they haven't done anything, right? Go out and win something. Go out, win a division. Go out and make a deep run into the playoffs. Knock Kansas City out of the playoffs before, the fan pumps their chest out. The victory on Christmas was awesome. It really was. It was a great, Christmas present for Raider Nation, but do something consistently. Let the team do something consistently before you start chirping like the heavenly kingdoms are falling down or whatever like that. Like, it was just silly again on the fans' part. I felt bad for Trey Taylor. He got put in that position. I know the AP wasn't happy about that. The team wasn't happy about it, and I mean, I guess it is what it is. But yeah, if you're a player, if you're a star, why not use something as a little bit extra motivation? I mean, we all do it. If you can find motivation and it gears you up and ramps you up a little bit more, sure, why not? So again, I don't think it's going to be the end all be all in this game, but I do think that there's definitely going to be a little something to be said about that moment.
Mahomes is petty, and he has always been petty. So to me, I know that he's going to have something just a little bit special for this, and I'm not going to be surprised if they don't have a couple of extra, special plays for the Raiders in this one, just because of that. The thing that's funny to me, and I agree with you, don't go attack, but I will say this. In some senses, I was actually happy they lost when they lost to the Raiders, because look at what happened afterwards. They didn't lose again the rest of the season. Didn't lose in the regular season. Yeah, still haven't. Right. They haven't lost since that last game. So to me, like, the thing that always worries me, and this isn't really a shot at the Raiders, but the reality is that they haven't been a good team for several years. Right. So the thing that always worries me about this type of game is that Kansas City starts overlooking the Raiders. Mm-hmm. I guarantee that's not going to happen this time, because of that thing with your player and the puppet. And Mahomes has looked bad enough. I don't think he's going to be overlooking any teams right now. But yeah, I mean, it was great for Kansas City at that point, because it refocuses the team. It gets you going in the right direction. And so now you're sitting in a situation where you haven't lost since that game. And I think that's really something that has benefited Kansas City in the meantime.
So there was part two of the conversation right there. A lot to do with what the Raiders have going on, and again, they got to play a clean game. It's something that I've been talking about quite a bit on Raider Nation Radio 920. They're just not good enough. They're not talented enough to overcome 1st and 20, 1st and 15, 1st and 25, whatever the case may be. Right, just shooting themselves in the foot with penalties, and obviously with costly turnovers. The Rams scored 20 points last week, all 20 off of turnovers. You just can't do that. This team is not going to win very many games, especially against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. But we'll get into that matchup. We'll talk about the Chiefs. We'll talk about the Raiders. We'll talk about what we believe can happen and how it can happen. We'll do that coming up as we close out the show, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about FanDuel. One, it's America's #1 sportsbook, and it is week 8, so I realize that the season is flying by, right? We're almost at the midway part of the season, and if you want to jump into it, you want to get in on some action, you can. If you're interested in this game right now, according to FanDuel.com, the Chiefs are favorite by 10. All right, so the over-under, 41.5. So whatever you're feeling like, if you think this is going to be a high-scoring game, low-scoring game, just know that, again, FanDuel.com has the over-under at 41.5. So in the middle of the game, if all of a sudden the Raiders are rolling and you're seeing that it looks like it's going to go over the under, it's going to hit the over, I should say, boom, you can jump on FanDuel.com right then and there and make some plays, right? You can check out all the latest stats. You can view the live play-by-play and so much more, also on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, FanDuel.com is America's #1 sportsbook. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into part 3 of the crossover edition with Chris Clark, host of the Locked On Chiefs. Remember that today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the crossover edition, is always being brought to you by Prize Picks. But it's time for us to jump into this, talk about the matchup, right? What each team has to do to come away with the victory, where the Achilles heel might be, and kind of where we're leaning at this stage of the game. We're not going to give predictions as far as scores, but we'll talk about where we're leaning at this stage of the game. So let's go ahead and jump into part 3 of today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover style.
Chiefs Raiders is always going to be a good matchup when we start talking in the trenches, but I think that you had another matchup in mind before we talk about the trenches. So what do you have on your mind?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by Brock Bowers, who's been a stud rookie for the Raiders, tight end. He's really a wide receiver in a tight end's body, and anyone in Kansas City knows all about that. They've got one that's pretty good named Travis Kelce, right? Well, Brock Bowers is fantastic. He's been everything that he's been cracked up to be, and then some, right? And he's the leading weapon for the Raiders, especially since they traded Devontae Adams. I just want to see how he does against the Steve Spagnuolo-led defense, because Spags has done a fantastic job. Every time Antonio Pierce talks about him, he gives him nothing but praise. Obviously, he's very familiar with them from his time with the New York Giants, but I want to see how he slows him down. I don't know if Jacoby Myers is going to be available this week. He hasn't been available the last 2 weeks with an ankle injury. He's the best wide receiver that the Raiders have since Devontae is gone, and Brock Bowers is the best weapon that they have. So he's going to be a guy who's going to be out there. I know that every defensive coordinator is going to look for 89 and say, okay, how can we slow him down? So I'm interested to see how the Chiefs will defend him and try to slow him down, because, again, he's a guy that's getting 10 catches a game. He's a guy who's getting a lot of yards after the catch. He's a guy that just finds a way to get open. I mean, he was a shock and a surprise when he was there available at number 13 overall in this past April's draft. Tom Telesco said, we got him because we need to get touchdowns. Didn't score enough touchdowns a season ago. He's going to be a guy that's going to help us move the chains, get us down to the red area, and get into the end zone. And he's done just that. I mean, he's only had 1 touchdown on the season, but I mean, just the production he's had from his position has been fantastic. And I know Spags is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league, and I know he's going to have a little something coming for him. I just want to see what it looks like. And again, he's a rookie, so we'll see, how he's able to, to play the chess game, right? If Spags comes at him one way, okay, how can he adjust what he's doing and still find a way to get open and make himself available for Gardner Minshew? That's going to be a huge matchup that I look at. Matter of fact, I'm not too sure how they're going to defend him. Do you have any idea of who or what kind of defense they might try to employ against Brock Bowers?
I will say this, that's actually probably the matchup that probably scares me the most when it comes to the Raiders, because when you go back and you watch Kansas City season, Isaiah Likely had a huge game week 1. It wasn't a specific Bengal tight ends week 2, but multiple tight ends had big catches in that game. And then we'll skip Atlanta because they don't use Kyle Pitts right, and they never have. I've never understood that.
Yeah.
So skip Atlanta. But then you get into week 4 and they play the Chargers and, a little bit of tight end. But really you get back into week 7, I guess it would, game 6 for the Chiefs. And they go up against, George Kittle, and George Kittle goes off for 92 yards. He didn't score 92 yards isn't a ton, but it's still, they're bad against tight ends. And I do think that that's a huge problem for this defense. When you start looking at it, though, the thing that really I think that they're taking advantage of is that they've found ways to stop the run. And if you can stop the run and make a team try to pass against you, their pass defense is really good. They struggle against tight ends, but their pass defense against wide receivers is very good. And they've struggled against some running backs. So I'm curious to see how Spags really tries to deploy against this matchup in Bowers. I think that he's probably going to try safety. Maybe he's going to try a linebacker or two. Probably going to switch things up on with multiple different snaps. But the big question I have is, how are they going to handle and how are they going to get after Gardner Minshew? Because if he's turning the ball over, Brock Bowers may have a big day. I mean, he could go for 120, 130 yards, but is that really going to matter in the grand scheme of things if Minshew's turning the ball over 3 or 4, 2 or 3 times even? Because you give the Chiefs an extra possession or two. While they haven't been great, they've been grinding teams down with their run game, and I think that that's something that they're going to continue to take advantage of.
Yeah, no, Minshew can't turn the ball over. I mean, this is a game that he cannot turn the ball over. Like, there has to be a big goose egg in the turnovers for the Raiders. And I hate to say that they have to play a complete, clean game to win this game, but they literally have to play a complete, clean game to win this game. They're just not good enough. They don't have enough freelance ability to be able to make a few mistakes and say, "Oh, no problem, we'll get them. We'll get that one back." Right? I mean, and you mentioned the run defense of the Chiefs and the way that they've been doing, how they've been slowing teams down from being able to run the ball. The Raiders struggle to run the ball anyway. Right. I mean, they did pretty well last week. They went over 100 yards last week, but that was against the Rams, who were the worst in the league in stopping the run. They also did really well running the ball against the Cleveland Browns. Shocking. They're also not very good at stopping the run. But everyone else, they haven't done good at all. And Antonio Pierce wants to run the ball. So you're going to see Alexander Madison. You're going to see Zamir White. You're going to see, Amir Abdullah. But I don't know how good they're going to be. And that kind of goes back to what you said about the trenches, right? The offensive line has been makeshift all season long. They've had guys in and out of the lineup due to injury. They've got a couple rookies there. And their left guard, Jackson Powers-Johnson, a second-round pick out of Oregon. They also have DJ Glaze, a third-round pick out of Maryland at the right tackle position. So that's a couple rookies. They're still trying to find their way in the NFL. It's been tough sledding literally on the ground, man, for the Raiders. So if the Chiefs aren't allowing anyone to run, then all of a sudden you make the Raiders one-dimensional. And when they're one-dimensional and Minshew has to throw the ball 35 or 40 times, that's when you start to see turnovers happen. So that's not a good recipe for the Silver and Black. They've got to find a way to establish the run. They've got to find a way to run the rock. I don't care if it's a tight end, or I don't care if you're handing the ball off to a wide receiver. I don't care how you do it. They've got to do it somehow, some way. And if they don't, then they're one-dimensional, and that's always trouble for Gardner Minshew.
Well, in another part of that is when you start throwing the ball, if you're not completing them, you're not taking time off the clock. You're not bleeding the clock. Time of possession becomes a big issue. So no, I absolutely agree. I think that that's going to be big. And you have to think Chris Jones is really looking forward to this matchup just because interior offensive linemen, rookies, going up against players like that, he's going to enjoy that. That's going to be a big thing in this game. And I'm not trying to throw shade at the wide receivers, but the reality is if Bowers can get you 120, 130 yards, if they're able to stop the run, the rest of the offense, at least from what I've seen from the Raiders to this point, I don't think they're going to get it done because I think you're right. I think Minshew is going to turn it over 2 or 3 times because he's going to have to throw 40 times. That's not a position you want the Raiders to be in.
No, it's not. And that's why Jacoby Myers coming back is so big. If he's able to come back, that at least gives him a reliable wide receiver one. He was a wide receiver one in New England, right? I mean, and they haven't been worth the salt since he left, but he was wide receiver number 2 when the Raiders had Devontae. Now, all of a sudden, no Devontae, so Jacoby Myers goes up to number 1, but he hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been available the last couple of weeks with the ankle injury. So we'll see. He practiced in a limited capacity on Wednesday. We'll see by Friday if he's a lot better and closer to going. He's huge. He is a huge piece because, again, outside of Brock Bowers, if no Jacoby Myers, you have Trey Tucker, and he's got speed, but I don't think he scares anyone. He's not established in a league like that. DJ Turner, he's got speed, but I know he doesn't scare anyone. He's not established in the league. You got Christian Wilkerson, who's been around the league for a long time. I know he doesn't scare anyone. I mean, my point is there's not a lot of weapons that you look at and say, oh, don't let that guy beat you. So, again, it goes back to 89. It goes back to Brock Bowers. That is the one guy that you don't want to beat you. And like you said, even if he does go off for 100 yards, 120 yards, whatever, like if no one else does anything, you're probably going to win that game. So there's a lot going on in this game for the Raiders. I've been calling it evaluation season just because I think everyone has to prove why they have a job and what their role on this team is moving forward. And so this is a big test for everyone, right? Offensively, defensively, the coaches as well. They've got to step their game up this week against a very tough Kansas City Chiefs team that's never lost in Allegiant Stadium. Think about that. Never lost in Allegiant.
I love it.
Raider Nation, go,
I
Chris.
understand why
Raider
you hate
Nation,
it.
go.
I understand why you hate it. I get it. The one thing I will say, and I don't know what they're going to do about Brock Bowers, just because he is such a. I don't want to call him a unicorn, but he's very rare in
Yeah.
what he can do and how he can do it. So how they're going to attack that is going to be interesting. But I will tell you, if Jacoby Myers plays, I'm not going to be shocked if Steve Spagnuolo doesn't come out and say, "Okay, Trent McDuffie, go take him out." And I don't mean take him out physically. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
just
sure.
go eliminate him.
Mhm.
And if he does that, then you're in a situation where you've got a bunch of other guys that, as you said, aren't going to scare people, and you can kind of scheme around how you're going to defend them. But Brock Bowers is obviously going to be the big one. When I flip it over, though, and I start looking at Kansas City, I will say this is a game that I kind of had circled because I was really kind of terrified of your two guys up front. I mean, Crosby, I never like playing against. And don't get me wrong, I love him as a player. He's
Right.
fantastic. If I could take any player in the NFL outside of the Chiefs and put him on the Chiefs, it'd probably be Crosby. I just think that he's a fantastic defensive end. But you add, your piece in the middle, and I know he's out for this game, but that was such a big piece for you guys. And so I was looking forward to seeing how, because you look at the Chiefs and they're built in the interior. So seeing those guys go up against, Christian Wilkins and that scenario, I'm sad that it's not going to happen. But
Yeah. No, I am too. He was a big piece. He really was. And he was starting to show what his worth was, when he got injured. Unfortunately, he opens things up for Max. He's a great player. Obviously, he opens things up for everyone on the defensive line. And now without him there, you could see, where they're hurt. And really, honestly, even before he went out, they were struggling to stop the run. They still have been struggling to stop the run. And the Chiefs have shown that they can run the ball, right? They do have an ability to run the ball if that's how they want to butter their bread. And so the Raiders are going to have to do that as well. I mean, again, the trenches are going to be so critical to this game, whether it's, the offensive line of the Raiders trying to slow down Chris Jones on the interior, or the Raiders defensive line trying to slow down the run game and try to obviously put pressure on Patrick Mahomes as well, clog up the middle so he can't step up into the pocket, make him do some other things, which, oh, by the way, he can do. So I think that the trenches are just going to be so critical in this game. Somehow, some way, when we're talking about it on Monday, it's going to be like, yeah, this game was won or lost in the trenches by one of these two teams.
yeah, and I think in past years, Kansas City would not want to win they would want to win it, but they wouldn't want to run it as much as I think that they're going to maybe in this game. They've been running the heck out of Kareem Hunt the past couple of weeks. I think that they're going to continue to do that. They ran for like 170 yards this past week, and I think that Kareem didn't have all of them. They've got a couple of different running backs, so I do think that that's going to play into it. Hopkins, we'll see if he plays. I've heard that they want to get him involved in this game. Obviously, coming in on basically because he didn't practice on Wednesday. So if he comes in on Thursday and getting 2 days of practice in, I don't think that he's going to know a ton, but maybe he can get in there for a couple of plays. So we'll see how that goes. But Kansas City being able to run the ball the way they have, I think, is really going to change how this game could come out and how it plays. How do you see it? And I don't necessarily need a prediction, but how do you feel about this game at the very end of the day?
I have a hard time believing that the Raiders are going to win this game because I have a hard time believing that they're going to play a clean game, right? And that's what it boils down to. I mean, it really does. If they've been getting 8, 9, 10 penalties, even at the week when they only had 4 penalties, they were critical, right? They stopped a interception that they came up with. They got off the field on 3rd and long and a personal foul penalty, put them back on the field. It was just dumb mistakes at the worst time. So I struggle to believe that they're going to play a really clean game and they're not going to have those penalties. They're not going to have those turnovers. So I think that Kansas City is going to win this game. I really do. I hate to say that. I would love to see the Raiders win it. But, of course, this will be the game in a rivalry game where you throw all that out the window, all the struggles that they may have had, and just say, hey, this team's going to go try to punch this team in the mouth, and this team's going to try to punch them back, and may the best team win. I mean, it just feels like that's how it's going to end up playing out, even though, like I said, the clean game's got to be had by the Silver and Black if they want to have a chance in this one.
Yeah, I personally, I'm with you. I think the Chiefs are probably going to win this game. I will get into more predictions on Friday with Ryan, but I will say this: I'm not going to mind if they find a way to lose at Arrowhead again in the future, because the last time that happened, look what happened, and the Chiefs are chasing a three-peat right now. So I'd feel pretty good about that if Kansas City even dropped a game at Arrowhead later. Seeing as how they're 6-0 right now, I think they have a really good shot at the number 1 seed. I know it's still early, but a lot of football to play. Q, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you. Going to look forward to this game.
So there it is. There it was right there. And again, there'd be no way that I can seriously say I feel confident about this game. I can feel good that the Raiders are going to win this game at Allegiant Stadium, knowing the success that they have not had against the Chiefs at home, not to mention all the turnovers and all the penalties they've had the last 3 weeks, right? If they go in there and play a clean game, yeah, anything's possible. The Raiders could definitely win, as you saw on Christmas Day, punch the Chiefs in the mouth. I could easily see that if they play a clean game. It all comes down to the clean game. Obviously, on Friday, we'll talk about, the keys to victory, what they have to do to have themselves a chance, the non-negotiables, I like to call it. We'll hear from Luke Getzey and Patrick Graham today at the Intermountain Health Performance Center. Obviously, on Friday, we'll get a chance to talk to Patrick Graham as well. We'll go over the injury report tomorrow. We didn't do it today because it was the crossover edition, but we'll go over that. Hopefully, Jacoby Myers is a go for Sunday. That'll help in a major way. And we'll continue to see how Desmond Ridder is coming along and how he's starting to learn the playbook. Don't expect to see him at all on Sunday. Maybe against the Bengals on next week's on Sunday. I expect to see Desmond Ridder following the bye week, but that's just me. So we'll get into all that coming up as we close out the week really strong tomorrow here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.